Hey, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Jeff Stein. It's almost
morning.
30 degrees here in Santa Clarita.
No way. Cool. 50. Yeah.
Come on, it's 45 degrees out there now, Rabbi.
Oh, when I got up, it was 30.
Yeah, when you got up.
Was it 30? It was cold. It was cold. I have a dog now, so I have to get up early.
How's that going?
My dog has an Instagram page now. I've only had an Instagram page for about 6 months. No. Yeah.
I don't even know what Instagram is.
Since February, I had an
dinosaur.
Instagram page. My dog has an Instagram page and I think has more followers than me. He just got it today, but he's cuter than me. But the point is that
Oh, that's for sure.
the point is that there's a chance that the dog could be, earning more than me too. We're trying to get him in the commercials, I guess now, supposedly. That's all right.
Hey, anything helps. Anything helps.
Listen, he wasn't free. Earn his keep. Earn his keep. I'm telling my daughter that too. She's got to start earning her keep. She's going to be 16. My little baby is going to be 16
Wow.
in
I can't believe that.
1 week from Thursday. Yeah.
I remember in class when he told us that that Tracy was pregnant with her
Crazy.
so many years ago.
Yeah, it was it's been a weird 16 years. I think we've all lived through some weird couple of years, but
And despite you, she's a very nice young lady.
she seems that way. She appears that way to strangers, but no, she is. She's just a lot more complicated than you think she is. She is like
All teenagers are.
most teenagers, but she I really feel for the kids right now. I really do. I mean, I feel for everybody, but I really feel for kids who can't be teenagers right now. Part of being a teenager is being able to go out and disappear a little bit, not for a long time, but just have a little freedom. This is the absolute opposite of freedom right now for everybody, but for teens.
Rabbi, I didn't
Yeah.
know that Orange County has made the kids go back to school. My
It's like 3 weeks.
my sister's
Before that.
granddaughter is being quarantined because somebody in her dance group went to a Halloween party. She showed a picture, 100 kids without masks. I mean, laughing, smiling. What stupid behavior. So she's quarantined.
I have to tell you, I know I've heard about things like that, Diane. You're absolutely right. But I actually, and I don't know, maybe I'm the over optimist. I'm actually surprised that there was as little of it as there was, at least in my experience. I guess I expected more. So I was really surprised overall, Dan, at least around here or in LA or whatever, the Valley, Santa Clarita, San Fernando Valley. I was surprised at how little there was. And quite frankly, I guess because most of the Dodgers have COVID, there was no Dodger celebration. So I
Hi, everybody.
Hold
I
on.
think it was
I
tough.
did.
I would think it was tough for our area, especially not to have parades and celebrations. Obviously, you saw people celebrating elections and stuff, but I don't know. I'm amazed at people's
Hello.
paying attention to respecting this stuff more, which I think is, we have to. I mean, those things, those parades and parties, and those are where people are getting sick. I mean, it's just, we know that. I mean, there's not a lot of things we know about this disease, but those parties are where people get sick. I mean, forget parties. I mean, the opposite, funerals, right? Funerals are really important ways of people saying goodbye. And I mean, we had one.
Who cares?
It's hard not to have a funeral for your loved one right now with people, but we had to do it. And I posted to the Wednesday night class, Chief Rabbi Sachs, passed away this weekend, and they had a funeral with just immediate family. There would have been thousands of people at his funeral, but they were very respectful of.
Did we know that he was sick? I mean, I think I read he had cancer.
We found out like a week and a half ago that he had cancer before. Actually, this was his third bout of cancer. I thought it was his second. He had 3 bouts of cancer, and this one, they only announced it about a week and a half ago that he was sick, and I just kind of assumed that he'd beaten it before, and so no, it was a surprise that he got sick so quick, and he wasn't. I mean, he was only 72, so
He was a relatively young man.
was young, and he took really good care of himself. He walked and jogged a lot. He was a
What did he die
vegetarian.
from?
He was a vegetarian cancer, but it was real quick. I mean, or at least since they announced it. But yeah, he was a vegetarian. He took pretty good care of himself. Was a guy who was worked real hard, but really, really wonderful writer. Really had a good grasp of things. And again, there was an interesting obituary in the Times yesterday. Yeah, yesterday, and he really did. He was actually even more. I think he was even more loved after he retired from the job a few years ago than he was when he was in the job. In the job, he was subjected to a lot of political problems. He never really could please everybody. And once he was done, he was just writing and speaking, and he didn't have to do that. And he really was a great teacher. We studied him for a couple of years. I mean, we almost read one of his Devar Torahs every single Divrei Torah, to be precise. We read his Divrei Torah almost every Wednesday. And even though I don't think I've ever met him. Maybe I did 25 years ago, but it was a long time ago. It was before he would have been chief rabbi. He was really, really remarkable. Gosh, it might have been 30 years ago. He was a remarkable writer, and he wrote really well about America too. He wrote some beautiful pieces about what makes America a special country, and was a very deep admirer of our original philosophers of freedom and our heroes. People like Lincoln and Washington, and he wrote about the revolution in America and why it was such a unique revolution, which is interesting for a British. I mean, he's a British Jew. He wasn't there, and his family wasn't there in the 1700s. But he really wrote about how the revolution of the United States changed the course of not just American history but human history. So maybe I'll post up a couple of those links so that you can see. But it's hard to find like the good ones because they were all good. They all had something to teach. It was really amazing. Anyways.
I listened to his TED Talk this weekend. It was terrific. And that might be an easy one for you to post a link to.
that is a good one. That's a little bit longer than the other ones, but I mean the other ones are just text anyway. So maybe I'll send that. I really we had just started communicating with Tracy's. So, everybody, I think most people know Tracy's family all lives in England, but so through Tracy's sister's family that lives in Manchester. So it's not our relative, but Tracy's sister Samantha is married to a guy from England, from Manchester. His nephew, so it's our cousin's cousin essentially, worked for Sachs for the last couple of years. He's now in yeshiva himself. So he's studying to be a rabbi or studying in yeshiva. But he worked for Sachs's organization. He worked for Sachs for the last 3 years. And so we're working on trying to get him next time he came out to America to do something on JLTV. And then we would be able to film it and do it if not in Santa Clarita and San Fernando Valley. So I'm really disappointed because we were just getting close in this last year, and we were just kind of waiting on when he was going to travel out here again. So it's very sad. It's very disappointing and tragic loss. And you know, he kept people positive, and he kept people thinking about the bigger, more important issues. And he really was a great voice for religious pluralism as an Orthodox Jew, which is hard to find. So yeah, it's a sad loss, and we'll dedicate Torah to him today. We'll study. We're going to study about the birth of Moses. Actually, last week we set up with the birth of Moses, and this week we're going to kind of get into it. Before we get into it too much, though, did I see? Is Francine? You're on the line. Hey, Francine, do you have any inside information on who's sick on the Dodgers? Your son hopefully is not one of the sick people, right? He's not sick, right? Your boy, right? He's not sick, right?
I asked him,
But he's not sick, right?
She's muted.
Yeah, you're muted, Francine.
as far as I know.
He's not sick. Well, you asked him. He told you he wasn't sick.
Yeah, I did ask him, and yeah, so he didn't say he was, so.
All right.
I guess.
All right. Well, it's kind of like a mystery. Well, I mean, it doesn't matter. Season's over, but you kind of hope that people, whatever, get to enjoy their off season. But hopefully, everybody will be fine and get back to strength and whatever.
Robert always had himself really covered up. He always, I mean, his mask was really up, and he was kind of phobic. So,
Yeah, the only problem was I kept looking for him and couldn't tell where he was. I kept Francine, is that your son? I think we saw him.
yeah,
And
he looks different now.
I know.
Looks
Well,
different. He's a lot heavier. He's being fed very well, and and he must be. And his hairline's changed a lot. I think it's more like Dad's. So he looks a lot different.
anyways, it was hard to tell because with it between a cap on and a mask, can't really see. But yes, we congratulate again all the players and wish that hopefully that they don't get too sick, or that it doesn't. Again, talk about a spreading event. I can't understand how everybody wasn't sick based on what was going on in that dugout. But anyways, on a positive note, one of our people who was recovering is Rosemary. And Rosemary, for those who were not here the last few weeks, literally just a few weeks ago had her heart being worked on. That's a nice way of saying heart surgery? But she had heart.
Well, it was, like you said, rabbi assisted.
Did she have heart surgery, or was it something else?
So, but I'm not ready to read yet. I was trying to read for my husband yesterday, and I fell asleep in the middle of a word. He goes, "Are you all right?" And I'm going, He says, "I thought you had a stroke."
Oh, great.
Well, listen, the important thing is whenever you're ready to read, back to read, that's great. But most importantly, you're doing really well. And I assume you're doing well. I haven't talked to you in a couple of days, but
Yeah, I am doing very well. Thank you.
good. All right. Well, that's really good news. And again, we hope you continue to get strong, and again, for everybody to stay healthy, please, because we've gotten through a lot, and we're at the point now where just do what you have to do, everybody, to stay healthy. We don't want anybody to get sick. We're hoping that obviously there's going to be a vaccine soon, but man, we do not want.
Alana just told me that Pfizer has one that's 90% effective. Is that true? Have you heard that?
That's what they said. Yeah, that's what they said yesterday. That that's what Pfizer announced. That's why the stock market went nuts yesterday. With everything, by the way, except for Beyond Meat, which I actually own. And Beyond Meat went down because now it says McDonald's is not going to be putting out Beyond Meat in their burgers. But yeah, I don't want to be bitter about that. But the big thing is that you have Pfizer and these biotech stocks that everybody's hoping are about to explode. So look, I don't care who makes money off of it. We just got to get everybody healthy right now, quite frankly. And
The problem with the Pfizer thing is that it has to be delivered at below freezing, and it's 2 shots, so it requires a great deal of education along with the
yeah,
vaccine. And
Yeah.
there are only 50 million doses initially available.
I'm hoping that this is like, who knows? I kind of hope that this is like a step, that each one of these things is a step, and you got to get something first. Look, I wasn't alive during the polio stuff, but I know that it wasn't, wasn't overnight that everybody got polio. I mean, I actually know stories of people who developed polio after the vaccine because they just didn't get it didn't get it the next day. And I'm like, oh, that's horrific that somebody actually got polio and there was actually a vaccine already.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope it's a step. Let's all hope it. It's a step in the right direction. And it's going to be a long winter otherwise. I think it's going to be a long winter anyways, but we're going to be positive and try to keep people safe. It's the biggest thing right now we have to do, right? So please, everybody, please stay safe and do what you have to do. Even if that means even going out less. I can't even imagine that's what's going to happen. But by the way, who did I tell this to? I told this to somebody. The Reform Movement has its biennial conference, which I don't go to every time. So it's every 2 years. So I went to it last year. It was in November. It was this time. I went there for a couple of days, and it was a good conference. I thought this last one. They canceled it for next November. Not this, obviously not now. It wasn't this year. Next November, November 2021, canceled. They're going to do something in 2022 in May for the Reform Movement, where they join together a couple of other conferences together to do like a big conference in May. APAC, as I told people, was canceled in DC. That's in February. So that was canceled. That was obvious. But November of 2021 is canceled. I found that to be, and they announced that a couple of weeks ago. So at the end of October, they announced that's canceled. So that's amazing.
Well, it's because the reason why is just because they have to pay a premium if they cancel too close. That's what's happening with all square dancers too. All our conventions have been canceled through most of next year.
Oh, so they do them. Yeah, I figured.
They have to pay.
Yeah, I figured. Yeah,
You got to pay the hotels. You got to pay the facilities.
I figured you have to put a deposit down. Yeah, you're hearing stuff that's for the, most people don't do stuff, conferences and things like that. They don't usually schedule them over the summer months. And the things that are post holidays, at least in the Jewish community, those are postponed or canceled. I wonder at what point, like, we don't have to make a decision about where do we do high holidays until a few months before, so we don't have to book it a year in advance. But there are large synagogues that book, the ones that book, like in San Diego, the Congregation of Beth Israel used to book the big theater, like the Pantages equivalent, or places that rent large 2,000 plus places. I wonder what they're going to do for September.
Rabbi, are you going to put this on Facebook?
Good call. We will do it right now as about to start. But we are recording, so everybody gets to hear this. But anyways, thanks for reminding me. I will then, Judith, are you ready to?
Sure.
And we're gonna pop this up as we read about Moses's birth. Last week we finished with the words that essentially. Hold on a second. We read that we read that we read that Pharaoh is given advice to kill the babies in order to stop the deliverance of the Jewish people. And so the idea to kill the children came from Balaam, who we will read about later in the book of Numbers, is a wizard, is a prophet, is the villain of Numbers. We encounter him already. We encounter him during the time of Moses, at the beginning of before Moses is even born, during Moses' birth. So it's kind of an interesting story. We also encounter Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, who's the hero of the story. So Job is the intermediate one. We also encounter him. So all of these guys are brought together as the three counselors of Pharaoh on what to do to prevent the rescue, the deliverance of the Israelites out of Egypt. What I thought was so cool is that this week we're joined by Reverend Lynn, who we really would love to get her take on some of this, because last week we read about the three wise men who counsel the Pharaoh. This week, as some of you see are looking at right now on the screen, the Midrash that we start with is called the slaughter of the innocents. And what's so strange about that, of course, is that normally when we talk about the slaughter of the innocents, look, the Torah talks about the slaughter of the it talks about the slaughter of Israelites, of the babies. But when we actually use the word the slaughter of the innocents, we're normally talking about a story in Matthew, the most Jewish of the Gospels, that talks about the Jewish babies being killed by King Herod, which of course,
Christian.
Yeah, please, Reverend Lynn. Yeah,
It's just on the calendar between Christmas and Epiphany.
And
the slaughter of the innocents.
And what do you do? And what do you do for it?
Nothing. It's just readings. There's nothing special that I'm aware of. It's just sort of a remembrance.
And there's one of the more famous paintings of it by Rubens. This is the one from this is the version of the gospel story, which is been immortalized in artwork. I mean, there's 100 of these pictures you can find from classic, from some of the greatest artists of the Renaissance, Middle Ages. It's a graphic story. It's a story that people look at and it's a horrific story. But most of the time, we focus on the Christian Midrash because that's the one we know so well. Well, today, right now, you're going to read the Jewish version, which was written a little bit before, or at least part of this Midrash was probably written a little bit before the Christian version, but maybe was influenced by the Christian version. I mean, they're written so close to each other that at least part of this could be that. And again, the Jewish version of the story is very, very, it's one line. It happens again after we read about the midwives not going through with it, that then the Pharaoh orders all the people to kill the male children and then save the women. But it's the female girls, the young girls. We don't really have much other than that's it. So let's read the Midrash on this story, because you're going to see a couple things that kind of make sense. But then I think it kind of goes to a whole nother level. So like you'll see. Just even in the first paragraph, you'll see what I'm talking about here. All right, so let's read this. And again, I'd show it on the Torah, but I just told you everything the Torah just said. tell all the Egyptians, kill the Israelite male children and save the girls. That's it. Okay. And again, according to the Midrash we read last week, this is Balaam. This is Balaam, the horrible seer. There's a reason why he's that bad, because he was involved in this. Okay.
The slaughter of the innocents. Balaam's advice was accepted by Pharaoh and the Egyptians. They knew that God pays measure for measure. Therefore, they believed that the drowning of the men children would be the safest means of exterminating the Hebrews without incurring harm themselves. For the Lord had sworn unto Noah never again to destroy the world by water. Thus, they assumed they would be exempt from punishment, wherein they were wrong, however. In the first place, though the Lord had sworn not to bring a flood upon men, there was nothing in the way of bringing men into a flood. Furthermore, the oath of God applied to the whole of mankind, not to a single nation. The end of the Egyptians was that they met their death in the billows of the Red Sea. Measure for measure, as they had drowned the men children of the Israelites, so they were drowned.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just pause right there, because you probably have heard somewhere before, maybe, measure for measure, right? And that the Israelites, the reason that the Egyptians drowned in the Sea of Reeds is because the Jews were drowned in the Nile. Has anybody heard that before? Yes? Anybody?
What, measure for measure, that's
That's why the Egyptians, the final act of the deliverance is, well, look, you may have heard that the Nile turned to blood as a punishment for that. The first plague, the Nile turns to blood, which some people say is measure for measure, because that's the same place that they, drowned these babies. So that's one possibility. So people, you may have heard that. There's another version of that measure for measure, which is that the final, it's not a plague, but the final miracle that God does for us, right, is the redemption at the Sea of Reeds, when the Egyptians are thrown into the water or drowned in the water, whatever you want to say. That's measure for measure, so that they are washed away for that. So that you may have heard too. What you may not have heard before is that the Egyptians knew that could happen. And the reason is that they knew that God pays measure for measure. So as bad as the Egyptians are, they know that God likes to, if it's not God having a strange, ironic sense of humor, that God likes to pay people back with what they do. It's not karma, but that it's actually even more than that. That, like, if you hurt somebody with this, you're going to get hurt with that too. So the Egyptians knew that, and the Egyptians chose the Nile drowning, which is what it says they did. That the Egyptians chose to do that because they thought that would protect them from God's punishment, because everybody knows the flood that affected everybody, and God won't destroy us with water anymore. So if we use water to kill, we're not going to get killed. We'll escape punishment because of it. It's a very strange midrash, because it not only talks about the measure for measure part, but the Egyptians knew that, and that's why they chose this punishment, or this mode of execution, because they could get away with it. So anyways, the point of that, of course, is that as the rabbis point out, just because God said he's not going to drown us or flood us doesn't mean that we can't go to the flood, right? That don't think that just because God's not going to cause the rain and the stuff to come on us. Yeah, God could still put men into a flood, right, and let the water go over them, which is what happens. The other thing is that, what are the Egyptians talking about? God said, I'm never going to destroy all of mankind. I didn't say I wouldn't kill smaller group of people, right? A nation even. I didn't limit myself completely. So the Midrash points out those couple of things about punishment, about divine punishment, and also again that the Egyptians knew about the divine punishment. That's what's so interesting to me about that Midrash, that it's not just on one level measure for measure, but all this other stuff is wrapped up into it, which is one of the reasons why the Midrash is so amazing and works on so many different levels, because it's not just measure for measure. All right. Then the fact the Egyptians, like again, the fact the Egyptians knew measure for measure, which is mida keneged mida. It's where we get the word measure for measure. Shakespeare there too. All right. So here we go.
Pharaoh now took steps looking to the faithful execution of his decree. He sent his bailiffs into the house of the Israelites to discover all newborn children, wherever they might be. To make sure that the Hebrews should not succeed in keeping the children hidden, the Egyptians hatched a devilish plan. Their women were to take their little ones to the houses of the Israelitish women that were suspected of having infants. When the Egyptian children began to cry or coo, the Hebrew children that were kept in hiding would join in, after the manner of babies, and betray their presence, whereupon the Egyptians would seize them and bear them off.
Yeah. So now we're starting to get a little bit more into the slaughter of the innocents, where you've got Egyptian soldiers running into the houses, taking the babies away. It doesn't really say, again, the Torah has one line. When I say one line, it's the last line. I just looked it up too. It's Exodus 22. It's one line. So it doesn't really say how the Egyptians carried this horrible thing out. But here you have bailiffs, you have soldiers running in and officers tearing the babies out of the moms, which is what you saw in the Rubens picture, which is horrible, graphic, brings it to life, gives us that level of oh yeah, now I imagine what's going on. But I didn't know about this. Is this a true thing? I mean, I've seen a couple babies in my life, but is this true that if babies start cooing and making noise, that other babies do that? Is that a thing? Is that like dogs?
Certainly crying.
A dog's barking and then another dog starts barking. I know that.
No, children too, babies. Yeah.
That's true?
It can scare them. The crying can scare them and they'll start crying too. You just had exceptionally well-behaved children.
Gosh, babies are dumb. They really shouldn't do that. They should know better. No, I didn't know that. I guess, yeah. Here it says cooing too, like that they're like if they make noises, like happy noises, they'll find out.
It's a warning system, don't you think, for babies? One cries, they set up the cry for everybody.
Don't be.
My God, they're coming for us.
They shouldn't give in.
They shouldn't do that.
They shouldn't give in to peer pressure. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, I guess. Well, somebody knew this because this must be a thing. Because the Midrash tells us that's how the Egyptians did it, was by having these babies that they would bring in to find the other babies. Did not know that you had baby dar. It's baby dar. They I mean, it's not. We're joking about a horrific thing because people obviously this to try to imagine how horrible it is for these women to lose their babies. But anyways, this is one of the ways that the Israelites. I just wonder if this ever happened. Like, part of me wonders if there's like some truth to this once where there were babies hiding and they would like bring in another baby to try to find them. I mean, I just wonder if it actually happened. I mean, that's the scary thing, that there actually might be, like, this might actually be something that people tried. Anyways, that's one thing. That's one thing the Egyptians did. Let's read what else they did.
Furthermore, Pharaoh commanded that the Israelitish women employ none but Egyptian midwives, who were to secure precise information as to the time of their delivery, and were to exercise great care and let no male child escape their vigilance alive. If there should be parents that evaded the command and preserved a newborn boy in secret, they and all belonging to them were to be killed.
Okay, so here we get something that the Israelite women were actually forced to take on Egyptian midwives so that we would get this. Now, we read last week in Midrash that the Egyptian midwives were actually not Egyptian, that they were, we read, right? That it was Yocheved and Miriam that were actually the midwives Shiphrah and Puah, which is a strange Midrash given the fact that the plain text of the Torah seems to indicate that these were Egyptian women. Here's kind of an explanation for how that would become important, in that the Egyptian midwives, if they were truly Egyptian, would then give the information back to the Egyptians as where these babies were born. This other piece of it, which was that if the family didn't, like, because the question you get is, how would anybody give up their baby, right? You know, how does anybody do this? And so the Midrash is answering that question. What would make a parent give up their child? And that's why you have this kicker, which is that if they didn't, the whole family was killed. So what do you do now? You know, for the greater good, for the health of your other children? I mean, Moses, we know, had two older siblings, right? Miriam and Aaron are already born. We know that. So was Moses's life putting everybody else in jeopardy? By the way, the Midrash makes sense, and probably, again, when you're dealing with Romans and other law, you know, people who exercise these type of laws, it's very possible that Jews lived under, the rabbis who wrote this lived under these kinds of laws, right? You know, if one person in your village, you know, fights against us, attacks us, we're going to kill everybody in the village, right? It's really difficult to even imagine, you know, what it's like to live under those kind of punitive actions. And, you know, it happens in parts of the world today, right? I don't want to get into politics either with this, but again, this is what everybody worries about with politics, with states, with you know, area. You say, is this area going to get punished because you know, they don't vote a certain way? There was a time when this isn't theoretical. This isn't, you know, on a level of not getting funding. This was on a level of an area being wiped out because it was a problem area, or because they had a few rebels or guerrillas in that area. It's a horrible thing to think about, and it exists even to this day. You know, burning a village down that had, you know, members of the other side, it's unfortunately part of history, and recent history. So this is a horrible thing to read. It's a horrible thing to think about. And the Midrash, I think, is talking about a reality. But I have a question now for you, everybody, to think about. If Moses's life jeopardized the rest of his family, how do Miriam, as much as Miriam and Aaron are maybe protective and appreciate their younger brother Moses, how do you feel the rest of your life knowing that your little baby brother jeopardized the whole family? I don't want to get too psychoanalytical either here, but just on a basic human level, it's got to stay with you.
Well, and in Prince of Egypt, for different reasons, they do they do show some sibling, at least on Aaron's part, not rivalry so much.
No,
really, you're not worth it. There's some rivalry too.
He doesn't like it, and I wonder, because they definitely used a lot of Jewish sources for Prince of Egypt, a lot of Midrash. They talked about it. And they did, and by the way, in the Ten Commandments, there's lots of Midrash. I mean, DeMille says that right at the beginning of the movie. There's a little thing there at the beginning about where the sources were. I wonder because the Prince of Egypt really dwelt on that, Aaron really doesn't like his brother, which is part of the irony, is that he has a good relationship with his adopted foster brother, Pharaoh. Ramses and him are friends, whereas Aaron doesn't really like him, doesn't really warm up to him until the very end. There is that kind of, you didn't live with us. You lived with the Pharaoh. You were raised as an Egyptian. You never experienced slavery. You've all thought about that before. This midrash adds another layer to it, which is very possible. Which is, again, even though Aaron was 3 years old when this happened, right? So he doesn't remember it maybe at the time. But what about 10 years later? What about 100 years later? What about the end of their life? Does this ever go away? Does this feeling like, is this kid worth it? Was this kid worth my life being jeopardized? It's a really weird question to ask, and it can be. I don't know if it should be asked, if you've ever thought about it, but what does that do to a family to know that one child, and especially the youngest child, everybody else was jeopardized or affected by this child? And look, what?
It wasn't the child's fault. The parents made that decision.
Diane, you're absolutely right. How can you blame the kid? You can't, right? I'm telling you, there's something so powerful about this, though, because every family that's unfortunately suffered with a situation where one child takes up a lot of the energy, whether it's because of physical illness or mental illness or whatever it is. I mean, especially, by the way, the sad thing is mental illness, because we still don't treat it as illness. But if it's a physical illness and there's one kid who's, all the family has to take care of because they're dealing with a physical ailment, it's not the kid's fault. But, if the family's constantly going down to Children's Hospital, or if the family is, if the family's spending a horrendous amount of resources financially to take care of one kid, you don't blame the kid, right? But it has an effect on the family. As a kid, especially as you're developing, it's not unheard of to have resentment towards that child that you have to get through. And I don't know what to say other than we're human beings. It's natural for us to just feel bad about things that happen to us, even if it's not the other person's fault. So anybody who's ever had that in their own family knows that it has an effect on the family dynamic. And to understand that the Moses family was dealing with this is a weird thing to think about, especially going back to the very beginning of Moses's life, jeopardizing the whole family. So again, you're right, Dan. It's not his fault. You can't blame the victim. You can't blame the person who's suffering. But it does create a sense of animosity or dysfunction oftentimes in a family, because people are people. They have normal reactions to things, and it's tough. All I'm saying is it's tough. It's not an easy thing to deal with, and we just had this in the Midrash thrown out to us. Don't have it in the Torah, but it's there. It's there. Look, Miriam has to go out and risk her life. We don't know that she's, works out good, right? But we don't know when Miriam does what she does, whether she's going to be arrested. It's a tough thing to put a little girl into a situation where she has to protect her brother. That's all I'm saying. So it's an interesting midrash. The midrash goes, my sister's keeper, Judith just texted me, yes, the Jodi Picoult book of bringing a child into existence to save another life. That's taking it to another level, right? But I will tell you that this is a very real thing for families, and it's at least we talk about it now. We discuss it. People can go through therapy, and they can start to work on this. But the dynamic between siblings is oftentimes complicated by these kind of things. That's all I'm going to say. And the Midrash puts it out there. Now, that's one thing. So families were risking their whole family if they kept the baby alive. That's one way you get compliance, you get people to go along with a horrible edict. Can't do it. I mean, how do you do it? Well, you weigh out the rest of your family for this one child. All right. So let's read. Well, so what do you do?
It is to be wondered at, then, that many of the Hebrews kept themselves away from their wives. Nevertheless, those who put trust in God were not forsaken by him. The women that remained united with their husbands would go out into the field when their time of delivery arrived and give birth to their children and leave them there, while they themselves returned home. The Lord, who had sworn unto their ancestors to multiply them, sent one of his angels to wash the babies, anoint them, stretch their limbs, and swathe them. Then he would give them 2 smooth pebbles, from one of which they sucked milk, and from the other honey. And God caused the hair of the infants to grow down to their knees and serve them as a protecting garment. And then he ordered the earth to receive the babes, that they be sheltered therein until the time of their growing up, when it would open its mouth and vomit forth the children, and they would sprout up like the herb of the field and the grass of the forest. Thereafter, each would return to his family and the house of his father.
Creepy, creepy, creepy.
I told you.
It's like
told
Cocoon.
you.
Star.
Cocoon.
I told you.
Oh, or cicadas.
Yeah.
We could just keep going.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that you take away from this is, oh, that's weird, right? You know, how do you how does that happen to one child, let alone like a whole bunch of children, a whole bunch of childs? I don't know how. I don't know. Our ancestors really didn't like the idea that parents complied with this law. They really didn't like it. Where they get these kinds of stories from? If you like Greek mythology, if you like the Greek myth, there's a very interesting myth that this idea of killing babies is in like every myth. You know, every culture has mythology about babies being killed, which I think obviously is kind of like, because it's your darkest fear. But obviously a lot of babies died in childbirth, right? So these are horrible ideas, but these aren't stillborn. These are babies being killed, right? And so there are versions of this. So one of the weird versions of this that is almost like exactly like this story, except not on a global level or on a lot of baby level. Anybody like the Zeus myths? The myths about baby Zeus? Baby Zeus got spared. His father Kronos was swallowing all the babies, if you remember, and so all the gods wound up in Kronos's belly because he had been swallowing all his babies, because he was told that he'd have a baby that would take away his power. So Zeus ends up not being swallowed. He ends up swallowing a stone instead. And how do you save a baby from the most powerful god? They hid him in a cave. Hid him kind of underground. And he was kept alive by a magical goat, Amalthea. And Amalthea had 2 horns. One of the horns had milk. The other horn had honey, magic goat. The Amalthea was revered as the foster mother of Zeus. And I don't know anything about, I've never read a Zeus myth about having, how he grew long hair and that was his clothes. I mean, maybe there's a Greek myth about somebody else who had long hair that wrapped around him and was his clothes. But this idea
interesting, because we're not supposed to give children honey.
Now
Now.
they always did.
I think there was a time when honey was was one of those things. Look, they know that honey has a lot of health properties, and maybe they thought that that would be a good way to get his or her immunity up. But milk and honey obviously are, those are like the best things you can have, right? If you can have milk and honey, the land is flowing with milk and honey. So milk and honey were like, if you can get those two things, that's all you need, especially if you're a baby. I'm not encouraging that, by the way. I want to make clear that as somebody who had 3 babies,
No
as I said before,
Scientology.
that we did not follow this dietary practice, but yeah, but they got watched over by angels, which is good too. If you have an angel taking care of your baby, that's always a good thing. And then to have these magic stones, but again, very similar to the Amalthea myth, which I'm sure predated the Midrash. So it seems like they knew a little bit about that, about hiding babies. Yeah, it's a weird story, but again, the idea that babies this was actually happening on a big scale, they didn't like that. They didn't like it because obviously it's a horrible thing, but they didn't like that people would comply with it. Look, we know not everybody complied with it. That's why we have Moses, right? So the idea that Moses was the only baby that was spared, the rabbis didn't like that. They didn't like that idea that only he was spared. Most of them, I would say, didn't like that, the idea. Even though you'd say, oh, well, that makes Moses super special, that he is the baby that miraculously, like every other baby died except for Moses. The rabbis didn't like that. They preferred the idea that somehow other babies got miraculously saved, and maybe even more miraculously than Moses. I mean, compared to what we read about Moses, having angels take care of you and feeding you milk and honey stones, those are the Moses story is kind of normal. So you'd think that the drama would be in that he's the only baby that survives. They didn't like that. They didn't want to go that route. They wanted to go, other babies got saved, and God wouldn't let little babies die. Anyways, I told you, it's a little strange. All right, here we go.
When the Egyptians saw this, they went forth, every man to his field, with his yoke of oxen, and they plowed up the earth as one plows it at seed time. Yet they were unable to do harm to the infants of the children of Israel that had been swallowed up and lay in the bosom of the earth. Thus the people of Israel increased and waxed exceedingly. And Pharaoh ordered his officers to go to Goshen to look for the male babes of the children of Israel. And when they discovered one, they tore him from his mother's breast by force and thrust him into the river. But no one is so valiant as to be able to foil God's purposes, though he contrived 10,000 subtle devices unto that end. The child foretold by Pharaoh's dreams and by his astrologers was brought up and kept concealed from the king's spies. It came to pass after the following manner.
Yeah, and as we read last week, and as we're going to take a look at it again a little bit later today, a little bit. Yeah, Pharaoh's astrologers and his fortune tellers, his advisors, his pollsters, they told him that there was going to be a baby that was born. What was interesting about it is it sounds a whole lot like the Jesus star story. Which came first? We're not sure. They were written around the same time. But the Moses birth narrative doesn't give us a lot. It gives us a couple lines, literally a couple lines. And so we don't know much about Moses's parents. We actually aren't even given their names right away. I'm not kidding. Like a lot of people think that I'm joking when I say that, and I will show it to you because I have it right up here and you can see it for your own selves. Folks, this is a mystery. His birth, let's take a look just real quick. The line of the midwives, we said last week, the midwife story is actually fairly long. It's actually much of Exodus chapter 1 is the midwives. That goes on for about half the chapter. Verse 22, so verse 21 is midwives feared God and he established them households. Verse 22 is it. That's it. The Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every boy that is born you shall grow now, but let every girl live. That's it. End of chapter, nothing more. So everything we just read in the Midrash is based on that one line. The line about Moses' birth is a cryptic line when you think about it, because it's like nothing. And that's, the rabbis know that. They know that we don't get his genealogy until 4 chapters later, which is weird. Like, why didn't you tell us this at the beginning? It's one line, and it's like we don't even get their names. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. Now, they translate it not literally. They translate it, and we've mentioned this before. They translate it with the understanding that the words Bat Levi means a Levite woman. Technically, Bat Levi means Levi's daughter. Levi, the child of Jacob. So that in reality, and it does say later on that Yocheved is actually Amram, the father's aunt. So Amram actually married his aunt. But here it literally says that a man from the house of Levi, married a daughter of Levi. And it says, the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. I don't like that translation for Tov, which is interesting, by the way, Ki Tov, which is, by the way, the same words that we have when the world is created, right? God sees it and says Ki Tov, and it was good. They translated it was beautiful. We're going to read the Midrash on what Ki Tov means. Ki Tov, here they translate is like he's beautiful physically. What, like if he was an ugly baby, she was going to kill the ugly. It's a beautiful baby. I can't kill a beautiful baby. Ugly baby, no problem. No, it's weird. So I don't love that translation. It's the translation
My
of the word
translation says godly.
Yeah, goodly. Was it goodly or godly?
Maybe it is goodly. It's not
Yeah,
godly.
goodly.
It's goodly.
That's it's godly too, but goodly sounds a lot like bigly. I don't want
Yeah,
the good.
It's a real word.
Goodly. But anyways, yes, that's the King James translation, how goodly it was. Yes, that at least conveys probably the real meaning of the story, which is he's a viable. I mean, we wouldn't want to say that, sounds a little clinical, but he's a viable baby. So the question, of course, what made him viable? That he was healthy, that he could live, that he was strong, we're going to get into that, I promise. But yes, the Ki Tov needs to be translated. And then it says she hid him for 3 months. Okay, so it does tell us how long he's hidden, how long he's in the house for at the beginning. And then it says simply, when she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket and caulked it with bitumen and pitch, and she put the child and placed it in among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. I do want to point out, because that's it. That's 3 verses. That's all we get. That's it. So all the wonderful imagination and movies and everything else, that's it. And by the way, he's put into the Nile in the reeds. He's not thrown in the Nile. He's not pushed in the Nile. He doesn't go down the Nile. He doesn't, at least in the story, he never moves. His wicker basket is maybe in the exact place where it's supposed to be for the Pharaoh's daughter to find it. So the idea that they just popped him in there and God took him the way that it was a miracle, everything else, maybe not. Maybe the Torah is actually telling us that this was a little bit of a setup, and more importantly, not as dangerous, which is interesting because when you take this line and compare it to the Midrash of how the other babies survived, you're actually left with the idea, well, Moses' birth and being rescued are actually pretty normal compared to the Midrash we just read. These other babies are being fed and cared for by angels. Moses just had to sit in the basket for a few hours, maybe not even a few hours. So that's all we have. The Torah does not give us much. And as we pointed out before, this is the way chapter 2 begins And I will show you folks because I love you. The chapter ends with Moses consented to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah as a wife. Yeah, and the last couple verses, the king of Egypt died, God heard their moaning, and God looked upon the Israelites and took notice of them. Moses' story ends in verse 22. Folks, we have 21 verses of Moses' early life from the time he was born until the time he has his first child. That's it, folks. That's it. To say that Moses is a man of mystery is an understatement. We don't know what happens to him. So the fact that we don't know what happens to him in the basket, okay, we don't. But we don't know what happens to him for the first maybe 30 years of his life. 20 verses.
Moses and
Arguably the
Jesus.
most important man in the Bible. We don't know anything about him.
But that's Moses and Jesus. I mean, who was Jesus? Until
And-
he's 30 and pops on the scene.
Yep, we don't know anything about Jesus. And part of that, maybe one of the reasons why we didn't get information about Jesus is because in many ways, again, he's reliving Moses's life, as we really
That's
are
right.
seeing from this. But man,
Exactly.
how do you get away with that without there being a lot of questions, which is why we have the Midrash. Now, again, we have Christian Midrash too about Jesus's life, and some of it's been popularized, but not a lot. Because whenever anybody starts, and Reverend Lynn, you could back me up on this, whenever anybody starts to go down that road of speculating what Jesus's life was like, you get in trouble, and you get in trouble with people who want to kill you. So you got to be really careful. I mean, there's a few people who've explored it. I remember Anne Rice wrote a book about Jesus in Egypt, Jesus's life. And, you know, people I think gave her a little bit of a pass because they just thought she was she's not a historian or anything, but people get into trouble when they start to speculate on what Jesus's life was like before. You can do it with Moses because again, he's not the son of God, and he's not, you know, he lives and
What about
dies.
Biff?
Well, what about what?
You know, Biff, Jesus' childhood friend, Biff. You don't know that novel?
No, I know the life of Brian. I know the life of Brian, but I didn't know about Biff. What's Biff?
BIFF, Jesus' childhood friend.
Are you making this up?
No, I wouldn't make it up. You know that.
Can I-
Honestly, it's a book. I can't remember who the author is.
Can you get? Oh, wow, I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna get my hands on
Biff.
Biff. Wow.
Yeah.
I love
Talk about bedrock.
I love the life of Brian because it doesn't deal with him.
Yes,
Also doesn't deal with him in those early stages either about what life was like. But yeah, you can't do it without people getting really bent out of shape about what Jesus's life was like. So yeah, occasionally you get into movies, but they always are very gentle. They're always very careful, very cautious about what Jesus did, because we have so little in the Christian Bible, as Reverend Lynn points out. I mean, we have this weird line about his bar mitzvah when he's 12.
Right.
It says he was 12, but you know, he was advanced, so he did it when he was 12. I'm not sure. It's in the book of Luke, and Luke was either wrong, like he was close, or they kind of didn't care whether you were 12 or 13. You know, kind of could be in that range. I don't know. Luke says he was 12, but we really don't know anything about his life from any of the Gospels or any of the four Gospels. So,
Excuse me, I have
Yeah.
the information about Biff,
yes,
besides being on Back to the Future. It's a novel by Christopher Moore called Lamb, the Gospel According to Biff, Christ's childhood pal.
I'm gonna have to read that. Thank you, Reverend Lynn, for sharing that, because I got to get my hands on Biff. I if it was you know,
That's
like,
what Michael J. Fox said. Just watch out for that manure.
Biff, is that also, was that an allusion to like Best Friends Forever? Is it because that's what they call it, Best Friends Forever? That's what they call it, BFF. I have to read that, but yeah, people are very careful with it. With Moses's birth and early childhood, the rabbis speculated, and we're going to read it And that's why we're going to be reading it over the next few weeks. I will not say it every time, I promise. But I do want you to remember 20 from the time he was actually born, because he's not born in the first verse, it just tells us about his parents. We got 20 verses, folks, about Moses' birth. You're going to see how much we get in the Midrash, but it's all based on 20 verses. So it's kind of amazing to think what you're going to see over these weeks, that the rabbis just, they had to imagine it, because we didn't have it. We don't have it. So let's read about his parents, and I promise you we'll get to his birth. But again, this is still, we finally hit chapter 2. We just hit chapter 2 with Moses' parents. So here we go.
When Pharaoh's proclamation was issued, decreeing that the men children of the Hebrews were to be cast into the river, Amram, who was the president of the Sanhedrin, decided that in the circumstances it was best for husbands to live altogether separate from their wives. He set the example. He divorced his wife, and all the men of Israel did likewise.
Oh wait, did I skip a paragraph?
I don't know, did you?
No. I thought that there was.
Nope.
I thought I skipped something. Yes. We're getting into forced separation. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead. So husbands were not supposed to be with their wives. So he, as the head of the Sanhedrin, which, by the way, this concept that the Jews had some kind of authority while they were in Egypt is amazing. Like the Jewish organization during slavery times was still there. There was still a Jewish court, a Sanhedrin, a Jewish body of authority that was making rulings. And of course, Moses, his father Amram, must have been a part of that Sanhedrin. So, wow. So what do? You don't stay with your wife. That way you don't have to kill a baby. So you maybe never went there in your imagination of what happens. So maybe have miracles, but you don't count on them, definitely. And we definitely have some Midrash that they never got into that. The answer is don't get into that problem. Okay, here we go.
Where was I? He divorced his wife, and all the men of Israel did likewise, for he occupied a place of great consideration among his people. One reason being that he belonged to the tribe of Levi, the tribe that was faithful to its God even in the land of Egypt, though the other tribes wavered in their allegiance and attempted to ally themselves with the Egyptians, going so far as to give up Abraham's sign of the covenant. To chastise the Hebrews for their impiety, God turned the love of the Egyptians for them into hatred, so that they resolved upon their destruction. Mindful of all that he and his people owed to Joseph's wise rule, Pharaoh refused at first to entertain the malicious plans proposed by the Egyptians against the Hebrews. He spoke to his people, "You fools, we are indebted to these Hebrews for whatever we enjoy, and you desire now to rise up against them?" But the Egyptians could not be turned aside from their purpose of ruining Israel. They deposed their king and incarcerated him for 3 months until he declared himself ready to execute with determination what they had resolved upon. And he sought to bring about the ruin of the children of Israel by every conceivable means. Such was the retribution they had drawn down upon themselves by their own acts.
So much there. So much there in that one paragraph. Where to begin? Because we don't want to miss anything. So here's the rabbis postulating that the men separated from their wives, and not just separated from them, divorced them, so that they were following the law, if you will. If you're not going to sleep with your wife, you have to let her go. So they didn't just leave their wives, live in a different area. They divorced them. Here we have the Levites. There's so much here, folks. There's so much here. And it probably was based on real stories. Here you have the Levites being the only tribe that was doing the right thing. So we read that they're from the tribe of the Levites. Well, here we read that the Levites were still following the law, whereas everybody else, all the other tribes, were giving it up. And they were living like Egyptians. Why? Because they wanted the Egyptians to like them. I think you're reading some Jewish history here, folks, which is, how do you fix the problem of anti-Semitism? You assimilate. You assimilate as hard as you can. So the German Jews tried it.
Spanish Jews tried it.
Spanish Jews tried it. We know from some sources the Jews of the Roman era tried it. The very powerful scene in The Source, Nishner's the book The Source, where a Jewish guy has his circumcision reversed, which is horrific. But here you have a version of it where, and so it happened. I mean, we know the Mishner was basing that on historical accounts. Here we have Jewish people not being circumcised in Egypt, or most of them not being circumcised in Egypt, as a final act of assimilation. Like, what is the most assimilating act we can do? Refuse to circumcise our kids. So this gets to this kind of idea of were the Israelites circumcised during this period? And it seems that they weren't. And the reason is that we read when they came into the land of Israel, they all got circumcised. They hadn't been circumcised for that period of time, or at least many of them hadn't. So this idea that the tribes had to circumcise themselves before they entered the land of Israel, where do you get that from? The Torah says that they needed to be circumcised. So that means they stopped being circumcised when they're in Egypt. There's a whole lot going on there, a lot going on there, because it talks about the assimilation, what assimilation, the limits of assimilation, the fact that it's tragic anyways, doesn't stop anti-Semitism. All of that is there. I mean, that's probably the bigger takeaway. That's like the most important takeaway. There's also a takeaway you have to take this conclusion away. If the Israelites were not circumcised when they were redeemed, not being uncircumcised didn't make you not Jewish. So if your parents didn't circumcise you when you were born because they wanted you to be Egyptian, that didn't stop you from being redeemed. That's there, folks. I mean, that's the conclusion from this. So that's there. There's another piece to this that we want to point out, which is that there's a Midrash that we just read that it wasn't Pharaoh's idea to do this. It was the people wanting to do it. That Pharaoh goes along reluctantly with the people. Now, where do you even get this from? Where does this come from? Well, it comes from lots of stories, folks. Because remember, and again, turning back to the Christian Bible, the stories of the Romans being goaded into executing Jesus, that's in the Christian Bible. That's not a Midrash. That's not a Christian Midrash. Pontius Pilate washing his hands and walking away and saying, don't get me involved in this. That's this too, folks, which is that the Pharaoh says, I don't want to have any part of this. What are you talking about? We owe the Israelites everything. Joseph kept us alive. What's so powerful about this is that it happens so many times in history, where there would be a king or a duke or a local lord that would say, you know what? I know you guys you've surrounded the fort, the castle, and you're telling me we have to kill the Jews. I don't want to kill the Jews. The Jews are really good citizens. They actually pay their taxes. They don't seem to have any grievances that They don't come and surround my castle with pitchforks like you were doing. And they would sometimes lock or even kill that local authority, and because the guy wasn't anti-Semitic enough. I mean, this really happened. We have very clear accounts of this happening throughout the Middle Ages, where the Jews would turn to the local authority. Sometimes it was a political authority. Sometimes it was an ecclesiastical authority. It was a local bishop who would say, "We're not killing our Jews, folks," and they would kill that guy. So this really happened. I mean, as crazy as this is 100% based on truth. So was it happening during the Roman period, Greco-Roman period? For sure. Was it happening in Israel? Maybe, but it was definitely happening outside of Israel. It was happening in places like Egypt and Greco-Roman cities where people said, you know what, let's kill our Jews, take their property. Don't you know the Jews are revolting back in Judea? And the local Roman governor would say, yeah, but they're not doing anything here. Leave them alone. And they'd say, no, we're killing them. And if you don't kill them, we'll kill you. And this happened. So what's so crazy about this story is that even though the story seems to not really be what the Torah says happened in Pharaoh, it did happen many times in Jewish history. So for every time we have a Hitler who tells the people, hey, you know what, we're killing Jews, and they go, oh, okay, whatever, we'll go along with it. There are a lot of stories of reverse where the popular voice was, let's kill the Jews. And then the authorities would go, really, are we doing that again? And they'd go along with it. So it's that this is the norm, folks. This is not the weird story. This is the normal story, and they put it back into the Pharaoh, into the times of the Egyptians and Pharaoh. What's so wild about this story is also the fact of why this even exists. Why does this Midrash even exist? Why are we trying to get Pharaoh off the hook? The Torah pretty much says Pharaoh decided to do these things. Here, Pharaoh gets locked up, deposed, and gets locked up. Why do we have this Midrash? Why does this Midrash even exist? Does anyone want to throw out an answer of why you think this Midrash exists? Anybody? Why would you want to exonerate Pharaoh? Well, by the end, you know, he's going
To
along
have
with
a better relationship with Egypt?
Maybe, but I will tell you what it seems as though they seem to be doing here is this line. Such was the retribution they had drawn upon themselves by their own acts. It's actually a rabbinic attempt to tell us, why did every Egyptian deserve to be punished? Or why did the country as a whole? Why not just punish Pharaoh? It's the pharaohs that are doing this, right? It's the pharaohs that are killing our people. It's the pharaohs that threw our children into the Nile. It's the pharaoh. Why are you punishing all Egyptians? And so this Midrash actually tells us, no, the Egyptians were behind it. Now you could say, well, they went along with it. You know, they were willing accomplices. They were Hitler's willing executioners, whatever you want to say, right? Pharaoh's willing executioners is the name of this book. No, this Midrash doesn't like that, because to some extent, it makes God responsible for collective punishment, which they don't want to do. They want the people to deserve the punishment that they get. Now, again, Pharaoh didn't run into the homes and take the babies out of the mother's hands. It doesn't say that. It says their soldiers did that. It says well, that's the Midrash too, but we assume the Pharaoh didn't go around killing all the babies. So there's that. You go along with it, you're going to get punished. But the rabbis didn't like that. They wanted the responsibility to be on the Egyptian people. And that's why they can be punished as a whole. So that's why that Midrash even exists, folks. It's to not have Pharaoh be the reason why everyone's punished. The Egyptians needed to bear responsibility here. And here we get it even more. Okay. Here we go.
When
No, we're here.
was I?
Right here. As for Amram.
Oh, as for Amram, Not only did he belong to the tribe of Levi, distinguished for its piety, but by reason of his extraordinary piety, he was prominent even among the pious of the tribe. He was one of the four who were immaculate, untainted by sin, over whom death would have had no power, had mortality not been decreed against every single human being on account of the fall of the first man and woman. The other three that led the same sinless life were Benjamin, Jesse, the father of David, and Chileab, the son of David. If the Shekhinah was drawn close again to the dwelling place of mortals, it was due to Amram's piety. Originally, the real residence of the Shekhinah was among men, but when Adam committed his sin, she withdrew to heaven, at first to the lowest of the seven heavens. Thence she was banished by Cain's crime, and she retired to the second heaven. The sins of the generation of earth of Enoch removed her still further off from men. She took up her abode in the third heaven, then successively in the fourth, on account of the malefactors in the generation of the deluge, in the fifth, during the building of the Tower of Babel and the confusion of tongues, in the sixth, by reason of the wicked Egyptians at the time of Abraham, and finally in the seventh, in consequence of the abominations of the inhabitants of Sodom. 6 righteous men, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Levi, Kohat, and Amram, drew the Shekhinah back, one by one, from the seventh to the first heaven. And through the seventh righteous man, Moshe, she was made to descend to the earth and abide among men as aforetime.
Wow. So much there. So much there. So the first the first part is telling us that Amram was a very special man. He must have been, right? Because he gets to be the father of Moses, who we know nothing about him. And so what's interesting here is that they say that he is immaculate. Like he doesn't do anything bad, which isn't normal, right? It's not normal for somebody to be so good. And what's interesting is that he's lumped together with 3 other people that we know nothing about. Nothing, other than they're connected to some really special people. It's almost that the absence of information about them means that they're good. We don't know about these people, folks. That's why they can be brought in here. So we don't know anything about Benjamin, nothing. We do know that he's the only brother who doesn't participate in the selling of Joseph, but we really don't know anything else about him. Nothing.
Yeah,
We
that
don't read
seems
about
like a pretty low bar to be considered this righteous
But
and
because
sinless.
there's nothing about him, and he's connected to Jacob, right? He's Jacob's son. Now we know a little bit about Joseph, and Joseph doesn't seem to be immaculate, right? As we saw, the rabbis start to give him a little fault right away. So you have to have 2 things. You have to be almost, we don't hear anything bad about you, anything that could be considered bad, which almost means we hear nothing about you. But the other thing is you have to be connected to somebody really special. So here you have Benjamin, who's Jacob's son, and it's direct line from Abraham. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're guaranteed. Levi doesn't seem so righteous, right? Levi does not seem like the righteous guy. We're going to get to that in a second. We, as a matter of fact, know that Levi was responsible for murdering a whole city. So how do you, well, with Shimon, but the 2 of them, but we're not that part yet. What we know about these 4 guys in this Midrash is that they're all really, really good people, because we don't have anything bad about them, and they're connected to these really good people or really important people. Now, David, we know we can't say that David is immaculate, right? Though the rabbis really try to do a great job of whitewashing him. The information's there. And so you're not going to get away with saying that David is immaculate. Very special. He's very favored by God, but he's not immaculate. But his father And the one son that well, not the one son, he had a lot of sons, but the son who's named, who we know nothing about, who's not Absalom, who's not who's not Adoniah, who's not Amnon, horrible man, rapes his sister. I mean, they're again low bar. Those are really some tough sons. Eliab, we don't know anything about, and so except we get his name, and that he's like in the first batch of kids. He's like in the batch of kids who could have been king. So what we take away from that, and Solomon, oh, definitely not without fault, right? He's almost faulted all over the place. So being connected to David is critical. Being his father and his son must be really special people. So here's the rabbis just inserting this idea that there are people who are really, really special people. They're really, really, again, death has no power over them. I mean, it wouldn't if people didn't have to die, but they have to die. But otherwise, they're going straight to heaven. These are like people who are perfect. So that's an interesting idea, which there's a little Christological feeling to that. But again, the rabbis aren't going to go that full way, which is that no, they have to die. Now we get into the Shekhinah story, which let's talk about that for a second. This idea that the Shekhinah, which is the divine presence, right? The divine presence is the physical manifestation of God in this world. That when the temple is built, or even before that, when the tabernacle exists, that is the divine presence in the physical world. There is a place where the divine presence could exist in a way that isn't like God's everywhere, yeah, but the Shekhinah is God, at least the physical manifestation of God. It's not all of God. And again, some people say it's the feminine part of God, the feminine face of God. It's definitely a feminine word, and so we talk about it. It's usually translated as the divine presence, right? The Shekhinah has as its root in Hebrew something that's close to you, that is your neighbor, that is your that you're in the midst of. In this case, it's in our midst. It's God in our midst. It's obviously a very mystical idea. It's one that people still kind of, there have been some of the versions of liturgy that address the feminine side of God. We sometimes have prayers that address the Shekhinah, which some people feel comfortable with and some people haven't. It's definitely not caught on, but there are prayers that I would say like feminist liturgy that addresses the Shekhinah. In Hebrew is the Shekhinah. Because Adonai, when we say the word Adonai, we're saying Lord, which is a male form. So the argument is, why can't we address the Shekhinah? I will say that, again, these are discussions that people have in rabbinical school and not usually on the street, but this is, we always kind of, when we get back to the Shekhinah, at some point we always talk about, yeah, this is the thing that comes out of the Ark in Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is something that we want to have, but it can be destructive. And so the Shekhinah is not something you want to mess around with either. But
could you differentiate between Shekinah and say Sophia?
Some people say that it's based on a similar kind of idea of how the feminine aspect of God exists and is accessible. That's where I would say it's similar. Sophia is divine wisdom, right? And it's the way that we understand God and the world. I mean, without getting, again, there's even more about Sophia that's been written lately. We also have that in Hebrew, right? We have the word for when we talk about wisdom and we talk about divine wisdom, which we call chokhmah. It's a feminine form too. That is sometimes in the Midrash, it's conflated. So there are times where it seems as though you're talking about chokhmah, you're talking about divine wisdom. But here, it doesn't seem to be wisdom as much as it's God's physical presence in the world, which we want to have, which as human beings, we want God to be here amongst us. So this is God being amongst us. But the problem is that there are horrible things that go on in the world that makes God's presence go away from us. And so here's where it's not really like Sophia. I mean, in the sense, again, that it has nothing to do with wisdom necessarily. This has to do with when people behave badly, God leaves. God retracts, or the physical presence of God. Let's say God retracts. God's physical presence gets further away from us. And so we have levels of heaven. And so Francine, wants to.
What we do, or because
Sure.
of what God does.
What we do. And so God's presence
So
has.
we
God's
remove
presence.
ourselves from God. God doesn't
Yeah,
remove.
God's presence withdraws from us as we commit sin. God's presence goes away from us.
Well,
Now, what's
wait a minute.
interesting?
My question is it God that moves away from us, or
Yeah.
is it?
Oh, yeah. No, the Shekhinah is moving away from us because of our behavior.
Okay.
Now, what's important about this is that God was here, and then God gradually got off of our planet and went further away from us. And it says she, so let's use the pronoun that the rabbis use. So when she was here on earth with us, that's the heaven on earth. This is where we get the restoration. And when we talk about Jerusalem being restored, Jerusalem doesn't get restored until, I gave away the punchline, but Jerusalem isn't restored until the divine Shekhinah is back in Jerusalem. What happens though is it's not Jews necessarily. It's not because of us in particular. It's because of the whole world. So one can make the argument actually, and it's what the Gentile world does that makes the world what makes the world further away from God's presence. Now, Adam is clearly the ancestor of everybody. Cain and his family are the ancestors of everybody. The generations of the flood were all of our ancestors. Noah came out of that. Okay, so the first levels, the first examples are all for everybody. But the other examples, as you can see, these are particularly, well, Tower of Babel people are still all of us too, by the way, until they finally get moved. The wicked Egyptians, in the time of Abraham, the ones who almost took his wife, and then Sodom and Gomorrah, which happens just after. Right? We read it in last week's portion. So we read Genesis chapter 12 and Genesis chapter 8 about wicked other people. The rabbis are definitely searching for examples of wickedness, which would get them to the 7 that would get the Shekhinah all the way out. But it's not like the Shekhinah goes all the way out. Every time, right, the Shekhinah goes back, another person brings them back until, well, actually, that's not true. Abraham starts bringing the Shekhinah back. But the Shekhinah comes back to earth because of these righteous Jewish people. And so what they do is they draw all of those previous people, those 6 people before Moses. And who are the 6? Well, you got to go to Levi and then his son Kohat and then his son Amram. You got to go to Moses's lineage, so that Moses was the end of 7 generations of people who were bringing the Shekhinah back to earth. And without him, then the final step doesn't bring the Shekhinah back. So Shekhinah, she comes back because of Moses. So finally, Moses brings the Shekhinah back to earth. And so that's why the Shekhinah is able to be in the Mishkan, which is the same root. The Mishkan is the home for the Shekhinah. That allows the Shekhinah to be once again on earth, Moses' presence. And so Moses is doing something just by being on the earth. He's forcing God to come back in the form of the Shekhinah, in the form of the divine presence, that he's restoring the Shekhinah back to the earth.
And he knows that?
He doesn't seem to know it, right? Because at first, he's a baby, and he can't know that then. What happens is that the reason that you can have God actually now, the reason that you can have God be in a Mishkan is because now God is back on earth, or the Shekhinah is back on earth, or whatever you want to say. The Shekhinah's presence, her being here now, allows for the Mishkan to be the home for her. So it's a really interesting mystical understanding of God's presence, first of all being feminine, obviously, but also the fact that Moses's birth allows the Shekhinah to come back. This is one of those things that's definitely not, it's not Jesus language, but it is this kind of idea that God's presence is on earth because of Moses. And I find that to be an interesting, you establish that, and that allows for everything else that happens in Moses's life. It allows for the plagues, it allows for the parting of the Red Sea, it allows for everything, the 10 Commandments, because God is now back in earth, is back on earth, which again is a little bit what kind of the consequences of Jesus. So I find you're going to find, and you're going to see that this is really Moses's birth narrative, the consequences of Moses's birth narrative, and what's really going on here. All right, let's take a look at this. We're going to finish up with we might read that he's born, but it's not important. You need to see what happens, why it's so important.
Why he gets born?
Why he's born. Why he gets born. All right.
Amram's sagacity kept pace with his piety and his learning. The Egyptians succeeded in enslaving the Hebrews by seductive promises. At first, they gave them a shekel for every brick they made, tempting them to superhuman efforts by the prospect of earning much money. Later, when the Egyptians forced them to work without wages, they insisted upon having as many bricks as the Hebrews had made when their labor was paid for. But they could demand only a single brick daily from Amram, for he had been the only one whom they had not led astray by their artifice. He had been satisfied with a single shekel daily, and had therefore made only a brick daily, which they had to accept afterward as the measure of his day's work.
So it's a great midrash on how smart Amram was, because Amram either knew what was happening, or again, because of his sagacity, right? His brilliance, he knew what was going to happen. So again, the Egyptians tell everybody, "Oh, we're paying you $1 per brick," and everybody goes, "I'm going to make 100 bricks a day. I'm going to cash in." Well, then they say, "We're not paying you anymore." Why? Because we're not paying you anymore. You're our slaves. How many bricks do I have to make? Well, the same you made before. We know you can make 100 bricks a day. You did it. So now go do it again. So it's an interesting way of tricking people into working, right? You trick people into working by knowing what they can do, having them prove what they can do, and then going, "You know what? That's what we're going to do. We know you can do this, so go ahead and do it." So this is the trickery that the Egyptians employed. So we read a little bit about it last week, how the Egyptians tricked us, by taking away a little bit over time. This is a good one. That's a good one. Good trick. Good trick. Well played, Egyptians.
Always underperform, lower expectations.
That's the make sure that your boss doesn't think you can do a lot, because when he comes back at you and says, "We've cut your pay by 50%," you're like, "You expect me to work 50? No, we expect you to work exactly the same. That we still have a job." And then you go, So yes, always underperform. Keep the
Underperform.
bar really low, just in case. I think there's a lot of people that live by that. I'm going to give you the bare minimum
Bare
so that
minimum.
you never ever get too high of expectation on me. It's a real problem. What do you mean you can't work? We know how much you did. We know how many how many widgets you made, or how many files you can upload per day, or how many cases you can work on. We know what you can do.
Yeah.
It's terrible because it's like you can see people doing that today to people. And yeah, you're right, Judith. That's the takeaway. Never deliver.
Never deliver everything.
I'm holding back. All right.
Oh, we're wrong.
Yep.
As his life partner, Amram chose his aunt Yocheved, who was born the same day with him. She was the daughter of Levi, and she owed her name Divine Splendor to the celestial light that radiated from her countenance. She was worthy of being her husband's helpmeet, for she was one of the midwives that had imperiled their own lives to rescue the little Hebrew babes. Indeed, if God had not allowed a miracle to happen, she and her daughter Miriam would have been killed by Pharaoh for having resisted his orders and saved the Hebrew children alive. When the king sent his hangmen for the two women, God caused them to become invisible, and the bailiffs had to return without accomplishing their errand.
Wow. There you go. That's a pretty cool trick. He didn't kill the hangman. He just made them invisible so they couldn't be found. I don't know when they became visible again. I assume they became visible because she ended up having a baby, and Miriam wasn't visible the whole rest of her life. But here's a little miracle done. So she's a special lady. She's not, by the way, as you notice, she's not a virgin. None of that. Well, we know that. She can't be. She already had 2 kids. Though it is strange that she was his aunt. That's because the Torah kind of tells us that. Could have been a cousin, but because she's bought Levi, she could literally be Levi's direct daughter, and therefore Amram being Levi's grandson, that would be his aunt. So they went with that. But as you notice, she's a much younger aunt. She's not like, the rabbis didn't want you to think it was like she was some creepy old lady who took advantage of her young nephew, right? No.
Isn't aunt one of the forbidden?
It is correct, Judith, that you're not allowed to marry your father's sister. But
Right.
that law arguably hadn't been given yet.
Fair enough. Okay.
We're living in some weird times. I like the understanding that she wasn't his aunt, that she was just of the tribe of Levi and was maybe his cousin. They were from the same tribe. Kind of telling us that he was a purebred Levite, but that seems to be, to me, the plain meaning of the text. But there does seem to be something a little different here, which is their relationship was not exactly, there was a reason for it, and it was divine. It was literally, and that's what the name Yocheved means. It means the divine, the kaved of God, the honor of God, or the splendor of God. It is the divine presence to some extent. And so she was an amazing lady. I think the celestial light that radiates from her countenance is a little Mary-like, but she lit up a room. We could just say
But
she
Sarah
lit up-
did too. Isn't there a midrash that Sarah lit up
Yes,
a room?
Sarah was a beautiful woman, well into her 90s. She was irresistible. Yeah, but again, she also for a brief period of time was invisible. So that's a pretty cool thing that was done for her, that she was not, you couldn't find her. Okay, so
Sort of Harry Potterish.
oh yeah, that's a little Harry Potter. You're going to see some more Harry Potter stuff. Yep.
The first child of the union between Amram and Yocheved, his wife, who was 126 years old at the time of her marriage, was a girl. And the mother called her Miriam, bitterness, for it was at the time of her birth that the Egyptians began to envenom the life of the Hebrews. The second child was a boy called Aaron, which means woe unto this pregnancy. Really? Because Pharaoh's instructions to the midwives to kill the male children of the Hebrews was proclaimed during the months before Aaron's birth.
Yep. That's weird. I'm not gonna lie. Didn't have to go there. But it's also based on this idea that, wait, if she was the daughter of Levi, I mean, here's where you get conflicting midrash, right? Let's do the math. How old could this woman have possibly been when she had a child? And yeah, that's the upper reaches of how old. And again, it's probably based on this week's Torah portion, right? Haye Sarah, right? How old was she when she died? 127 years. See? So 126 seems to be fairly arbitrary, that it's not connected to Sarah's 127 years of her life. But it, here it kind of gives us what we do know, which is that it goes Miriam, Aaron, and then Moses. But what you didn't know, or maybe you didn't think about, was their names, right? Because here, the son, I mean, Miriam is definitely connected to the word mar, which means bitter. Maryam means like bitter water or bitter waters. Aaron is based on this idea of woe, of sadness. And they give explanations for it, which is that Miriam was born at the time that the Egyptians began to enslave us. Aaron was born when the midwives were told to kill the babies. And of course, Moses is born when they're actually throwing babies in the Nile. So her life reflects these stages of darkness for the Israelites, and specifically for the babies. Because again, even with their death, there are steps. We pointed this out before last week. It's like the Nazi experience. It's not like people just woke up one day and they're killing Jews. They, took away their rights, took away their homes, took away their property, put them in concentration camps. And then, we like to remind people, very important, 9 years from the time Hitler came to power in 1933 to 1941, 42, when the final solution was put into effect. That's 9 years. That's a decade of people living with these laws and having warning and knowing that this is the way it's going. The Midrash tells us this is what happened in Egypt, and that some people, including Miriam, their lives are reflective of these stages, right? And the kids actually carry names that are reflective of these stages. So again, the Midrash, basically, the first part of it is to explain how many years passed, right? They have to make the math work out here. And so that's how they did. That's how they did it, by still saying that Amram is Levi's daughter. All right. So I promise you we'd get to a little bit of Moses's actual being born. I don't think we will, but it's okay, because again, this wonderful Midrash is based on one line, or actually all the lines we don't have before that one line. All right, so let's get back to Amram. Here we go.
The birth of Moses. When Amram separated from his wife on account of the edict published against the male children of the Hebrews, And his example was followed by all the Israelites. His daughter Miriam said to him, "Father, your decree is worse than Pharaoh's decree. The Egyptians aim to destroy only the male children, but you include the girls as well. Pharaoh deprives his victims of life in this world, but you prevent children from being born, and thus you deprive them of the future life too. He resolves destruction, but who knows whether the intention of the wicked can persist? You are a righteous man, and the enactments of the righteous are executed by God. Hence your decree will be upheld."
All right. So what happens there is that Miriam shows her stuff, right? That's why I love it. This is a midrash that I love, because it shows that this young daughter Miriam, however old she is, doesn't just stand up for her brother. She stands up for every Israelite baby. And what a powerful thing to say. And of course, part of the consequence to this is that you're not going to just destroy boys, you're going to destroy everybody. You're going to, and at least with girls, you know, we can still survive maybe, but there is a weird thing in this too that I almost don't want to get into, but I will since it's there. Ignoring it doesn't help us. If the baby's born and dies, is murdered, at least it can live in the afterlife. That's a tough midrash to digest. But that's what that says. Right? Right? So that's what it says. If you don't let the children be born, then they can't go into the world to come. So that's when they're saying future life, they're not talking about, well, maybe they'll have a future. That's the Olam Haba. That's the world to come. So that's one argument that she uses. But then her final argument to him, is maybe there'll be a miracle. Who knows whether the intention of the wicked can persist? Don't give up. Don't help them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really, really powerful midrash, because I mean, you just think about, you know, people who still tried to live during the Holocaust. I mean, there were babies that were born
In the camps.
and, well, not so much in the camps, but yeah, I mean, they were, but they did not survive. But in the years, in the days or months just before that, I don't know what to say other than this happened, and people didn't give up.
Is there any notion that children unborn have something, that they are something? That,
you know, it's
that they
interesting.
exist?
It's interesting here because you don't get a lot of it. You get occasional references to the born and unborn, but you're never really sure whether the unborn are the ones who just still haven't been born. Like, what does it take to get to heaven? Like, do you have to have one breath in this world for you to be able to say that you were living? The rabbis don't really go down that road. They don't really open it up to, are there a bunch of fetuses living a life up in the world to come? They don't discount that it's a possibility, but they don't talk about it. There does seem to be this idea that once somebody's born, though, even if they died as a child, as an infant, that there's a world to come for them. it's a real strange thing, because again, at what point does that happen, right? They don't go down that road. They really don't think about the consequences of what that means. But they do here. I mean, they do throw it out here as a possibility, which is that maybe infants, if they're born, even for a moment, that they can live in the world to come. So that's what we
Isn't
just
there
read.
some thread but isn't there some thread of theology with the Latter-day Saints that unborn babies are waiting to be born, that they exist on some plane?
Yeah, but here's the weird thing. And again, we get a little bit of it, but we don't get the full effect of it or the full consequences. The rabbis really don't go down there a lot. If somebody is meant to be born and enter into the world, there seems to be this idea that even if they die as a child, okay, so they did live here. But if they never lived, if they were never born, then there's a question of whether there was ever a soul inside that body. And that they do get into this idea
Was there a body?
of ensoulment. Was there a soul in that body? Which is one of the reasons why the rabbis at least can put out there that there is a point in time where a soul goes into the fetus, that it's not there from the moment of conception. So the rabbis do, I will say this, they don't write about it a lot, and so there's not a lot of stuff in there. But this time that they call the quickening or the ensoulment of a fetus is something that the rabbis assume happens. And so that when that soul would go into the fetus, then you can make the argument, once that soul exists, once that soul comes into being, once that soul comes into that fetus, then it's got to live out its life either in this world or in the next world, or hopefully both. But if it doesn't get time in this world, it'll definitely have time in the world to come. So that's why it kind of allows for, and again, this is the consequence to it. It is an abortion, the taking away of a life. And the rabbis would say, if the fetus did not have a soul yet, then there isn't a life. It wasn't ever a life.
But
course,
if
The problem,
there
of
is
course,
no
is the problem, of course, is then when does that happen? Does it happen after 40 days? Does it happen after 80 days? At what point is there what they call ensoulment? They call it that. I didn't make
but
up
what
that.
if there
I
is
didn't make
no
up that
fetus?
word.
What I'm saying is there's some Mormon theology that says there are these souls waiting to be
Yeah,
born.
it exists in Judaism too. That there's a goof, there's a soul hall where souls get called out that are going to go into a body. Okay, so that exists in Judaism. They took that from Jewish theology, but
Yeah. As
the
far
question
as I
of-
know, that doesn't exist in Christian theology.
I think that
As far as I know.
I think it goes against, to some extent, this idea that life begins at conception, right? So that's one of the reasons why maybe the soul is in the seed to begin with, which then gets into a whole other problematic answer of, well, is there a seed? Does every egg have a soul? Does every
Right.
does every ova have a soul? Ovum have a soul?
And is the soul carried in the sperm or the egg?
Correct. So that's the other issue, right? Is there a soul in each? The rabbis definitely seem to say that there is a point when the fetus isn't even. They say this. The fetus isn't even a person yet, right? It's not a soul, and it's literally fluids. So they say that. The consequence, of course, is that then there is a point in time where it's not ending a life, terminating a life. There's no soul yet. Once the soul would be in that body, in that flesh, even as a fetus, then there'd be that's a life. It's a viable life. It's not only a viable life, it's a ensouled life. It's a life that's now there's a soul. It's got a divine gift of a soul in it now. So So what's interesting
Reminds me of a
about
joke, but I'll control myself.
what?
I said, it reminds me of a joke that I love, but I'll control myself.
What? Tell us.
Make the
Tell
joke.
us. Now you have to tell us.
Well,
You have to.
Baptist,
You don't have to.
Episcopalian, and a Jew are talking about when life begins, and the Baptist says, well, life begins at the moment of inception. And the Episcopalian says, well, we believe that, life doesn't exist until the first breath is drawn. And the Jew says, what? We believe that life begins when the last child leaves home and the dog dies.
You told it a little differently, but I'll go with yours. The way that we oftentimes tell that joke is that well, that's the life begins, but when does the soul, when does the child reach ensoulment? And that is when the
Right.
child goes to medical school. That was the Jewish version of the story.
The
I
very
like that too.
When is the child viable? Some people say when it goes off to college, and then people took another degree when it starts medical school. So when does life begin? Yeah, but that's taking it from the standpoint as like, then you get to live your life, right? But the
Right.
other one is, when is it actually no longer? When is it no? I mean, the consequence is, when is it no longer abortable? Which we used to have this discussion with my mom used to say, "Oh, I believe in abortion at least until 15 or 16." That was her version of the joke. So yeah, she was there
And
somehow that
didn't
joke,
Samuel Clemens say until 21?
yeah,
Should be
sometimes
kept in a barrel.
sometimes the joke has different ways of going, yes, but it's important to remind ourselves of those as being jokes, yes. But yeah, I love that midrash. We'll finish with that, which is Miriam stands up for every Jewish child and for the families and says to her dad at the last lines, Dad, God listens to you. You're a righteous person, and if you say it, it's going to happen. So don't do it. Don't tell people that they can't have children anymore. And it's a really powerful Miriam midrash. When we talk about who this young lady is, wow, what a heroine. I mean, she literally as a child stands up to her father and argues on behalf of miracles and of possibilities and of, doing the right thing and basically not giving up. Don't give up, and don't help Pharaoh. If Pharaoh's going to kill us, we'll make him do the work. You don't do the work for him. It's a powerful midrash, and it's one that gosh, I can imagine people arguing with their parents in the darkest days of the Holocaust, telling their fathers that were on the Judenrat, the Jewish councils, don't do Hitler's work for him. If they're going to kill us, let him kill us. You don't select who's going to go out and be killed today. Don't do it. And we know those discussions happened. And we know, by the way, in some cases, the kids told their fathers, "You're not going to save us. If you're going to select people, if you're going to have that job of selecting who goes out, you're taking us too, because we're not going to have our lives protected because of your complicity." So this is not ancient history, folks. When I read this, I think about the people that this happened to, and the people who made these decisions, who again, some people say, how do you make that decision? It's horrific to think about. So on a happy note, we're not really ending on a happy note right here, but I will tell you, Moses does in fact get born. And things will be okay, folks.
Sneak peek.
Well, actually, let's read the last paragraph. I don't want to end on a sad note. Why don't you read the next paragraph, just so we don't have sadness. Don't want to end on sadness.
Amram recognized the justice of her plea, and he repaired to the Sanhedrin and put the matter before this body. The members of the court spoke and said, "It was you that did separate husbands and wives, and from you should go forth the permission for remarriage." Amram then made the proposition that each of the members of the Sanhedrin return to his wife and wed her clandestinely. But his colleagues repudiated the plan, saying, "And who will make it known to the whole of Israel?"
You read the last one.
Accordingly, Amram stood publicly under the wedding canopy with his divorced wife, Yocheved, while Aaron and Miriam danced about it, and the angels proclaimed, "Let the mother of children be joyful." His remarriage was solemnized with great ceremony, to the end that the men that had followed his example in divorcing their wives might imitate him now in taking them again to themselves. And so it happened.
Good. So you have to finish with this last paragraph.
Old as Yocheved was, she regained her youth. Her skin became soft, the wrinkles in her face disappeared, the warm tints of maiden beauty returned, and in a short time she became pregnant.
Yay. I wanted to end there
It's hope
because,
for all of us, old lady.
well, for you, Diane, you look radiant. What are you talking about? I think Diane looks radiant.
She does.
So I think that yes, this is for every woman, every man should get their youth back. And yeah, all it takes is a little bit of God's help. But yeah, everything ended up being okay. You guys probably never knew these stories of Moses's parents having to be divorced and all this stuff that went into his birth. But wow, it's pretty wild. And it's very powerful because as crazy as the miracles are, and as as there are parts of this that are so real, and again take us back to the Holocaust in our history. But of course, it's going on in other parts of the world right now. If you were a woman 2 years ago giving birth in Syria, how do you feel good about the prospects for your baby? Look, there's so many examples of it, folks. You don't have to pick one, but we should never be complicit in our own genocide. We should never be complicit in whether we go along with it or whether we encourage it or whether we do nothing for it. The reality is that this is not the way things should be, and nobody should ever say, well, what do we do? Do we come up with a plan to, do we try to come up with a plan to make this happen or to help us with this stuff? No, you fight against it. Miriam is the example. Miriam is the example for us all to follow, who stands up even to complicity and to people trying just not to, to save lives, and say, no, we're going to fight, and we're not going to give up. And that's a great message for today. All right, folks, you should all be radiant. Your skin should become soft and your wrinkles all disappear. All of them.
And pregnant?
Pregnant? Bite your tongue.
Maybe.
I wanted to announce something, basically that, because I volunteer at the food pantry. They are really actually don't have enough food. They're having to order food from the food bank, and they're short basically on tuna and peanut butter and rice and canned fruit. I can't think of what else, but it really is a need there, and
people can just go over there, Francine. They can just stop by the food bank.
They can just drop it off, and they're more than happy to take whatever donation somebody wants to drop off.
Okay. By the way, I think we have some stuff over at the temple somehow that got there, so I don't know who's going in there, because people are not going in there, but we'll get that food over to them too. But yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, because I go there on Mondays, so I could take whatever's at the temple over there. Just have.
All right. Well, we'll talk about it. I'll either open up, I'll meet you over at the temple and we'll get it for you. But thanks for reminding us about that. And there was a little blurb today in today's newsletter, today's e-blast about Family Promise, which now has a house, folks. We now have a house for Family Promise, but it's not enough because we have too many people and we don't have any place to put them. But you can sign up to help with meals for Family Promise too right now. So that just went out last night. All right, folks, stay healthy, everybody.
See you tomorrow.
We'll see you tomorrow night. And trivia night. You can go against Judith. Trivia night. By the way, we need Rosemary. Rosemary, you got to be there for trivia.
Oh, yeah, Rosemary will win. I don't want to go against Rosemary. She'll
gotta-
win.
You got to keep it real. It's Jewish trivia, folks. It is Jewish.
Need Ronnie there.
Ronnie might not. Maybe we'll see.
I'll be in DC. I'll be in DC, but I hope to play anyway.
We hope you will play. You're the person to beat, Gina.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're early-
Only because I beat the Schoenwetters last time.
An early favorite. An early favorite. That doesn't mean you're going to win. I just said you're an early.
Ooh.
All right,
What
folks.
you got, Rabbi?
What? Take care.
You giving odds?
On Judith?
Yeah.
I don't know I can't give odds until we know everybody who's there. But please sign up if you haven't yet. Please sign up so that we can get everybody together. We have about 20 people signed up already, which is great. But we'd love to see everybody there. It's for fun. It's for fun.
It's for
All right.
fun.
Take care, everybody. Stay well. And we'll see you, like we said, tomorrow night. You can join us for Torah study. Bye-bye.